Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and welcome back for another weekly edition of Z Real Estate's discussion on real estate. All right, quiet title. What is it? What is it used for? Why do we have it? So this week we're going to be discussing quiet title and what it is. In a nutshell, quiet title is a lawsuit brought in a court action having jurisdiction over property disputes in order to establish a property's title to a real property and, in an essence, quiet any challenges or claims against that title. So let me give you a couple scenarios in which a quiet title would likely be the most pragmatic remedy to the problem at hand, which would give you a good idea of when it would be used for, how it's used, and what the fundamental purpose of filing a quiet title action would be, okay? Let's imagine you got a seller who wants to sell a property and a buyer wants to buy a property. You got a willing seller, willing buyer. They both come to terms and agree. Seller says, I want to sell for this price. Buyer says, okay, I'll pay that price. Seller gets the grant deed executed. Buyer sends all the money to escrow. Money changes hands. The title gets recorded. And guess what? The seller gets the money. The buyer gets title to the deed. Now, let's imagine for a moment, after this happens, the buyer goes to the property, which is now his property. And as he's hanging out at the property, you know, looking at it, admiring the new property he just bought, some guy comes along and says, hey, what are you doing in my house? And the buyer says, what do you mean? I just bought this house. And the person says, look, I don't know who you are. I've owned this house for over 20 years. I never signed any grant deed. This is my house. What do you do then? Is it possible that the person that signed the deed and gave the property to you was fraudulent? Absolutely. I wish I could say no, but unfortunately, these things actually do happen quite a lot. So in scenarios like this, what would happen? I'll tell you. The buyer that bought the property, now they have legal title. The real seller, who says that he was defrauded because he doesn't know anything about a sale, he never executed a deed, never signed anything, would go to a court and say, hey, look, I just want to let you know, this is my property. Somebody has clearly and evidently fraudulently signed my name. I never agreed to this. I'd like to file a quiet title to get my property back, please. And the judge would say, okay. And the title would go right back to that original seller because clearly it was fraud. Clearly that seller never did it. I know what you're thinking. What about the buyer? What about all the money they spent? Oops. Unfortunately, they're kind of SOL. However, the good news is that kind of is the purpose of title insurance, guys. So in a scenario like that, title would be on the hook. Title would have to make it right to the buyer. Okay, so that's one scenario in which a quiet title action would be used. Let me give you another one, which actually did happen to one of my REO clients. Okay, let's say husband and wife move. You know what? In order to accurately demonstrate this one, I'm going to use a piece of paper so you kind of have an idea of what's going on. Let's say a husband and a wife move and to a forest area and they come across two lots of land, right? And the two lots of land, one here and one there. And they decide to purchase both lots. And then after they purchase both lots, they want to build a house right in the middle. So they do. After they do, they decide, you know what? We really need a little bit of money. We spent all the money we had on the property, on building it. So they go to a lender and they say, look, we own this. We own the house. We'd like to pull some money out. What does the lender do? Well, the first thing the lender is going to do is verify that they do indeed own both parcels and the house is theirs. Once this has been done, the lender will usually issue the loan, given the cash, providing, of course, the equity is there, and naturally, that they qualify. So, assuming they do, what the lender should do is encumber both parcels. Okay? Meaning, encumber, meaning make it collateral. Encumber it. Unfortunately, I had a scenario where, again, a house right down the middle of the two lots, only one parcel was encumbered. What does this mean? It means skip ahead to the point when the people actually couldn't afford to make the mortgage payment. And now the lender is legally allowed to foreclose. Unfortunately, they can only foreclose on what has been encumbered. And because the originating lender screwed up and only encumbered one of the two APNs in question, and now you got a house running right through the middle of two lots, we have a scenario in which the bank owns half a house. Uh-oh. What do you do in that situation? Well, usually what happens, and again, quiet title would be a perfect example. So what actually happened is you had somebody else, a brand new party to this transaction, purchase the missing piece, had a tax sale, believe it or not, and put his foot down and say, I'm not selling for less than $300,000. As it turns out, what the bank's attorneys ended up doing is filing a quiet title action and showing a judge, look, we should have had both pieces. If the originating lender had done the job they were supposed to do, we would own the whole thing. And the only reason we don't is because the originating lender encumbered one instead of two lots, leaving us with half a house. That's not our fault. They did a poor job encumbering the property they should have. So they filed a quiet title action showing a judge, we really should own this house, the whole house and all the parcel, and that guy is not entitled to anything. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So quiet titles are a way to quiet other challenges to the property. I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm hoping you guys have a little bit better understanding on what a quiet title is and how best to go about filing it and when it's needed. So I'm hoping that makes sense, guys. And if you have any questions, of course, by all means, feel free to call me, 909-999-6888. I can always be reached at any of these numbers down here. And again, I hope everybody has a great week. If there's any specific discussion points or questions that you guys have, real estate related, that would be ideal. Please leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to get to it. All right, guys. Until next week, have a great week, everybody.